Once there was a woman in the Old Testament who was able to stand up in the midst of a whole bunch of men and become a leader and actually become a military general. Stay tuned. Hello, my name is Father Mike Manning. I'm a Catholic priest. God bless you very much for tuning in. I am deeply excited about what I'm going to be sharing with you today. Now, every year, I try to come up with programs that I hope are going to be touching you in your life as followers of the Lord, followers of the Bible and what it says. And this series is on a very interesting topic. It's the women of the Old Testament, the women of the Hebrew Bible. Now, I've always read the Bible and I know the Bible well, but when I set out to put together all of these women of the Old Testament and just line them up and then start hearing their stories, I was overwhelmed. My gosh, you know. The stories can shock you, they can inspire you, and one of the questions comes, what in heaven's name are they doing in the Bible? Some of the stories are really, really far off from some of the holy and sacred people you'd want to meet. But today I want to talk to you about a fascinating woman by the name of Deborah. We know the name Debbie, and there might be a lot of Debbies there among you that are hearing that name. Did you know that she was a very significant person in the Bible? Now, this is my hope too, that as I'm sharing this story of Deborah, that it's not just you sitting there and looking at it and saying, oh, well, that's nice. But I'm hoping that maybe you're going to open up your Bible and you're going to be able to go to this section of the Bible dealing with Deborah and study yourself, or maybe get together with some friends and read it together. And I'm going to come at the end of the program with some questions that might be a catalyst for you to say, well, let's see what we can do. This is the point. How can we make this person that lived so many thousand years ago, but that's in the Bible, how can we make her an inspiration for our life today? And that's my challenge. I'm going to tell you a little bit of the context of who Deborah was, and then I'm going to tell you her story. And then I'm going to try, and I hope you're going to be with me on this, to see how that person is going to relate to our lives today. Now, let's kind of look historically at who Deborah was. Now, remember this, for the first 200 years of the presence of the Jews in the Holy Land, after they left Egypt in their slavery, and then they wandered for 40 years in the desert, they fought and they tried to get along with the people that were already in what we know as the Holy Land. Well, the leaders of the Jews, of the Hebrew people, were called judges, and this lasted for about 200 years. Again, they've been in Egypt, they've been in the desert, they come in, and for 200 years they're trying to find their place, oftentimes doing a lot of battling, but needing leaders. Now, some of the judges during these 200 years were people that you know. Joshua, Gideon, Samson was one of the judges. Now remember, this is about 1,100 years before Jesus. Deborah seems to be the first female leader of the Jews. Now, she was acquainted with military strategy. The battle she led takes place near Mount Tabor, which is in Galilee. It's in the northern part of the Holy Land, only a couple miles from Nazareth, where Jesus lived. The Jewish enemies in that day were from present-day Syria and Jordan. So that kind of gives you the the historical context. Let me tell you the story now of Deborah. As we've been examining the lives of women in the Hebrew Bible, most of them seem to play a role that is secondary to men. And then, like out of nowhere, Deborah steps on the scene as one of the prominent leaders of the Jewish people. She takes the reins of her people as a counselor, as a judge, and a decision maker, and get this, the commander-in-chief of the Jewish army. One of the reasons for her prominence in the Bible is her deep, deep faith in God. Now, when the army of the Canaanites, these were the people that were in control when the Jews were trying to come in, they started battling with the Jews, and the situation was that these enemies of the Jews far outnumbered the Jewish army. You know? And they're all ready to attack and just decimate the Jews. Well, Deborah, she starts to show her military genius, and she starts to maneuver the position of the Jewish army so that the enemies of the Jews are going to have to move to a certain position by a mountain. And lo and behold, when they're by this mountain, what happens? A terrible rainstorm comes, and from the rainstorm, all of a sudden, there's this torrential downpour, a flood of water that comes, and the enemies of the Jews who had gathered around this mountain with all of their chariots, and we're talking about 900 chariots. So imagine if you had 900 chariots, the horses and the chariots and the swords. All of a sudden, this flood of water comes down the mountain, and the chariots get stuck. They can't move. And in this immobilization of the enemy, the Jews come together, boom, and they were able to beat them up, and they're conquering them, and they killed all of them. They killed all of them, except for one. And that was the general of this enemy force, who fled away on foot. And we're going to hear about the fate of this man as we go to our next person, Jael. We're going to hear about her story, and that's a fascinating insight. So that's the story, and I hope that you pull up the book of Judges, chapter 4, and make sure that you read the Word of God and understand the power of this woman. This woman, again, it's fascinating because as we look at the whole history of women and we're looking into the Bible, she stands out as this courageous, loving, wise, but also very, very smart military leader. Well, now the question comes. The question comes in our life. I want to see if we can maybe relate Deborah to today. And here's the question. Women leaders. Now, in our study of women in the Hebrew Bible, Deborah rises with a bit of a shock suddenly. We move from women who in many ways are struggling in a submissive secondary position to the men who are in their lives. For example, Eve, what is Eve? She's taken from the rib of Adam. Sarah, in many ways, seems kind of secondary to the power of Abraham, her husband. Even Rebecca and Rachel, they're great women. They're doing a lot of things, but kind of secondary. And then a woman suddenly becomes the dominant leader of her people. And this is Deborah. She has the military qualities of a superb general maneuvering her army to overcome the more powerful enemy. The question is, why do men resist female leadership? Why is it that all of a sudden Deborah stands out as this person that suddenly takes this role of leadership and prominence? Well, recent history offers examples of women taking leadership roles. I'm thinking of certain women who high levels of political influence. We can always think of Queen Elizabeth I, back in England. Talk about a woman of power and strength. More recently, Margaret Thatcher in England, very powerful woman, strong. And you can even go just kind of reaching out into Russian history. And Catherine, who was called the Great, was a marvelous leader of the people. Despite an overwhelming dominant leadership in the Catholic Church of male celibates, some women stand out for their influence as leaders. 4 women have been given the title of Doctors of the Church. Teresa of Avila. Remember Teresa? She lived in the 1500s. A woman of great faith and a woman of great courage and a woman of great learning and spirituality. Another woman was Catherine of Siena, a young woman. She died in her 30s. A woman who became very influential in political world, the political world of the Vatican. Remember, there was a separation and there was a Vatican movement over to France. And this young girl became a strong influence to bring church unity again. Another doctor of the church is Saint Therese of Lisieux, a young girl, again, another young girl, a Carmelite nun, who in her autobiography was able to express a deep, deep love of Jesus and a power that was able to reach into the lives of people that touch people around the world. And then there's another lady, and this is going back into the 1100s. The other woman doctor of the church is Hildegard of Bingen. Hildegard was a fascinating woman back in the 1100s when you didn't hear much about women leadership. She became a mystic, a music writer, a person who was able to move and found great communities in a wonderful way. Powerful women in the world. Well, I'm gonna stop and we're gonna have a commercial, and I want you to listen to this commercial. But we're gonna come back and we're gonna see some fascinating challenges of what it means to be a woman in the world today, drawing from the wonderful example of Deborah. Please stay tuned. Thank you so very much for your prayers and your financial support of this ministry. You are vitally important. Now, we've got an organization called the Mighty 800. We're looking for 800 people who every month will support us with a really powerful donation to allow us to continue. Problem is, we only have 677 of these people that are helping us. We need another 123. Would you think about joining the Mighty 800? Remember, the purpose is we get a program that goes across the country every week, sharing the love of God and the power of what God can do in everyone's life. This program is seen on the Trinity Broadcasting Network, seen on the Church Channel, and even on the American Forces Network, plus many cable networks. In addition to that, we have a daily reflection for your smartphone. It's called iGod Today. Oh, this message is going to 70 countries around the world. But in addition to that, we have to be involved with this internet. We have to maintain our web page. We also have to be very active in social media. You know that. It's called Twitter and it's called Facebook. When you join and make your first payment, I'll send you a free copy of my book, 15 Faces of God. This is the story of how Jesus tells us who his Father is through the parables of Jesus. And if you're already a Mighty 800 number, and when you invite someone else to join the Mighty 800, we'll send you and your friend a copy of 15 Faces of God. Please. Our need is urgent. We need help. Please call the number on the screen or reach us by email. And God bless you for your generous help. Okay, welcome back. We're talking about Deborah from the Hebrew Bible. And it's interesting when you look at the list of female political and religious leaders, it's very small compared to their male counterparts. Whether in politics or in the religious scene, there's a male reluctance to empower women with leadership roles despite the biblical example of Deborah. I wonder why. Well, a dominant human characteristic is the need for power. There's a universal inclination to cover a deep-seated conviction of inadequacy with control and dominance of others. Through history, men have been more successful in taking on positions of power than women. Jesus presented a new orientation, a paradigm shift in our overriding quest for power. His whole mission was predicated on a young woman, Mary, his mother, and her saying yes. Women's financial support became key to the beginning and the sustaining of the over 70 men and women who were the disciples who formed and gave promise to the plan of bringing salvation to the world. A woman, Magdalene, was the first to experience the resurrection and proclaim it to others. Jesus brought forth a new characteristic of leadership's power. He cared for the non-influential of his world. He washed the feet of his disciples. He died naked, pinned to a cross with nails through his hands and feet. Jesus invites you and me, his contemporary disciples, to follow his example and to lead by service and risk empowering women. I also want to see if we can relate Deborah to our world today, especially this dominant woman, by investigating the male and female makeup of each of us. Hold on with me, if you would, for this. And listen, I think it's important as we understand this dynamic of the understanding of the relationship between men and women. As I look at the strong example and control of Deborah, I'm reminded of the insights of the psychologist Carl Jung and his theory of the word anima and animus. For Jung, every man has a female part, an anima, and every woman has a male part, an animus. The goal of every person in life is to acknowledge this other ingredient and then integrate this other part of himself and herself. And so a man is challenged to move into unexplored depths of feeling, relationships, nurturing, and sensitivity. And a woman moves into an unexplored world of power, seen in the more physically dynamic, intellectual, and socially challenging side of herself, such as assertiveness and taking charge of situations that oftentimes involve men. All the women we have seen so far have certainly been in touch with their male side. They're able to take control as they take charge. Deborah strikes me as standing out as a woman who is in touch with her animus, with her maleness, with her male reality. The integration of men and women's animus and anima is vital for personal wholeness. For a man to ignore or deny his female part can lead to suppression, abuse, and even the destruction of others. Life becomes confusing, depressing, and even debilitating. Bad results happen when a woman suppresses and denies her male, her animus. Beyond personal problems, groups in society can deny and frustrate the integration of the animus and anima. Men of a nation who have suppressed their female can quite easily break into war. One of the reasons Western countries went to war with countries like Iraq and Afghanistan, one of the reasons was to liberate women from being treated so cruelly and suppressed by dominating men. Lack of integration of the female in men and women can lead to a religion that suppresses women and women supporting the suppression. Today, we must individually work to accept and integrate our respective male and female characteristics. This is vital to our spiritual and psychological peace. The challenge arises in the various groups we participate with. In the workplace, at schools, in gatherings of friends, local and national government, and even our local, national, and international church. There was another side to Jesus, and that was a side of this integrating of the sensitivity of what it means to be part of him, a female. You know? The ability, for example, for him to care for people that nobody else cared for. It took the tenderness of a woman to reach out and to touch the leper. You know, the person's body is covered with leprosy. I don't know, this is terrible. And part of this female that he was in touch with allowed him to touch that person. We find him, as we spoke before, of the integration of his whole ministry with his mother, with Magdalene, with so many women that he spoke to. This ability to acknowledge the female characteristics that we have into us is one of the ways of allowing us to be balanced and be able to reach other people. And Jesus was very attractive to women. You know? I'm thinking of that woman that came up and wanted to touch the hem of his garment, just to touch the hem of his garment, probably with a whole bunch of men around. And Jesus saw that, and he saw goodness, the tenderness and compassion, the balance between the strong man and yet the person who could be able to love and care for this woman. Whew. The other example that is so strong is the example of the woman caught in adultery. A whole bunch of men, and it's interesting that it said that in order to accuse a person, a woman, of committing adultery, two men had to catch them in the act, had to see them sleeping with this other person. You know? Well, these two men, and probably a whole bunch of other men, are grabbing this woman, they're bringing out, men are dominating her, bringing her out, standing her in public and saying, now, the law says that we should stone her to death, blah, 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 you know, like this, you know. And all of a sudden, in the midst of all of that, the deep, deep sensitivity, the anima of Jesus comes forth. And in this, despite all the male shouting and screaming, there was love and there was care for this woman. The beautiful balance, the beautiful bringing together of what it means to be a man who is sensitive to the woman in her life. Okay, stay tuned, we're going to be right back. We have a dream. We want to produce a very important program for which we need your special help. We want to tell the stories of our brave military personnel, people you know or knew. You can be part of this program by sending us the story of your loved one. We'll combine all the stories into a beautiful television program to air across the world. Be sure to send photos. Please consider a financial gift to enable us to produce this inspiring program, acknowledging our military. That means your loved ones. Please contact us with your story and donation. Call the number on the screen or write to us. Please, the need is urgent. Do it right now. Allow this miracle and this dream to happen. Thank you very much for hanging in with me. Listen, I'm hoping that what I've said is going to kind of push you on to perhaps doing some your own personal study, but also getting together with others and wrestling with the beauty of who Deborah is in our life. And here are some questions that you might discuss. Think about this. When and where are women more effective leaders than men? Then, what should women do despite male opposition to attain higher levels of leadership in society and the church? And again, should women be permitted to fight in war with men? And then finally, why do we fear to accept our opposite part? Remember, I was talking to you about the animus and the anima. Why is there oftentimes a fear of not accepting that integration of the male and female, which is part of each of us? Well, again, I thank you so much for writing. Please, make sure that you get in touch. Would you call? We want to talk with you. We want to share with you. We want to give you as much love as we can. We want to know if you have any special prayer intentions, and we're going to pray. I get such beautiful, and I thank you so very much for doing that for us. Janice from Florida, praying for her son. We're praying for that. Lena from Illinois, her son is in prison and facing 30 years in prison. Manuel from Texas, he needs to find a job. Lord, all these people, all these wonderful people, part of our family right here with the television ministry, we need your help. Come with your healing. And may Jesus' love for you always make you smile.